Lords and ladies, yesterday was absolutely huge in terms of the reveals that we received. But for me, nothing was a greater reveal than the revelation of the 7th origin character. I had already been contemplating playing this character simply because it was an unknown. I'm not familiar with their behavior, or how they speak, or their intentions. So when it turned out that this Dark Urge was the 7th origin character, I was intrigued. Because effectively, it's almost like playing a tab, albeit with a kind of backstory. So you can play whatever race, gender, class you want, and you'll still be the Dark Urge, something I like a lot. And I'm pretty convinced that this will be my first playthrough, at the very least. I will be playing the Dark Urge origin on my first playthrough. But of course, the revelation of the Dark Urge is also a revelation of his origin in large measure, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist or a detective or an expert on D&D lore to recognize what's going on with the Dark Urge and what his relationship is in terms of his background. You can look at all the symbols, the associations, the story, for example, the murder mystery. It's pretty obvious the Dark Urge is in some way very closely associated with Baal, the Lord of Murder, the now quasi-deity, former Lord of Murder. That much is obvious. It's almost impossible to miss, given what we've seen in the images, given what we've seen in the gameplay trailers, etc., etc. The Dark Urge is somebody who has been afflicted by the urges of something related to Baal. Now, going from there, of course, we can speculate, because it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a Baal spawn. Remember, Baal has returned. He is now a quasi-deity. He's one of the dead three. In fact, Baal returned specifically when the last two Baal spawn died fighting each other in 1482 DR, namely Abdel Adrian and Baikang in 1482 DR. They both died, and as a result of this, when these last two Baal spawn died, that released the final essence which allowed for the resurrection of Baal, albeit as a quasi-deity. He is basically immortal now. He is not a god as he used to be. But that's where these questions really become interesting, because people just assume that the Dark Urge is a Baal spawn, and that's possible, but to my mind that would be a little gimmicky. After all, we know that the Baal spawn saga is over, and it was officially concluded over a century later in 1482. No, I don't necessarily think that just because the Dark Urge is associated with Baal, that he is in fact a Baal spawn, although it certainly would be possible. Because although the Baal spawn saga is now canon, it didn't start off that way. So the idea of the god Baal seeding the realms with his sons and daughters so as to come back one day if he were to die was not an official lore, so to speak. Only later on did it become canonical. So it's entirely possible that they would add a new Baal spawn, but I'm not sold on that idea. It could be just as well that these memories are the memories of somebody else, for example, that he's been implanted with. Maybe he was a priest of Baal at some point in time, or an assassin. So whilst it's possible that he is in fact a Baal spawn, I would say it's 50-50. There are other associations you can have with the god of murder that aren't necessarily directly equatable to, oh, he's a Baal spawn. Setting aside what we saw in the teaser trailer the other day that I talked about, that the Dark Urge could possibly transform into the Slayer form that was present in Baldur's Gate 2. And there are a lot of indications, obviously, that this being is heavily associated with the god Baal. And I think more than just for the legacy effect, although I think that plays a big part of it, namely the previous Baldur's Gate games were about the god Baal, basically, and your association with him. In many ways, Baal is the scariest of the dead three. Let me explain why. Bane is very powerful. He is arguably, in many ways, the most powerful of the dead three. He was the only one, at least prior to 5th edition, to continue to exist as a greater deity, the god of tyranny, strife, and hatred. But at the end of the day, he is a politician. So you can wheel and deal with him. You can negotiate with Bane, as you can with his acolytes. They are profoundly evil, but they are also profoundly lawful, organized, and profoundly political. And that allows for a lot of leverage, that allows for a lot of flexibility in your dealings with anyone who follows Bane, and even Bane himself, to varying degrees. Merkel is a little worse as the former god of the dead. He used to be known as Merkel the Necromancer, but Merkel always displayed a sort of apathy that was relatively absent in somebody like Bane, and certainly in Baal, which we'll get to in a bit, in the sense that he ruled his kingdom, he was pretty evil, but he didn't have certain features that either Bane had or Baal. For one, Merkel is not lawful evil, he's neutral evil, so he doesn't really care about politics or wheeling and dealing. But as the Lord of the Dead, he kind of took a backseat to a lot of things. He would observe frequently rather than directly participate. Baal is quite literally a different animal entirely. Although historically he was portrayed as lawful evil, they have revamped him into neutral evil, and I think that's much more appropriate. Baal doesn't care about politics. He doesn't care about observing and seeing what's going to happen, which is something that Merkel used to do. No, Baal only cares about one thing: killing and slaying sentient beings, above all humans and humanoids. That's what he gets off on. That's what he cares about. Killing, killing, and more killing. And there's not a whole lot you can negotiate with when it comes to that. He's not a politician. He's not a necromancer. He's not a researcher, because at the end of the day, Merkel was a sort of researcher. So Baal, in many ways, who was an assassin in life, and a bloodthirsty one at that, really only cares about killing people, murdering people. That's what he does. That's what he stands for. And I think that that is quite frightening compared to the others. Bane and Merkel historically might have been more powerful, but Baal, in terms of his sheer brutality, his savagery, his total disregard for life, as well as his indifference to any other principle other than killing, is much scarier. And I think that's why, above all, the dark urge is associated with Baal. Sheer brutality, sheer violence, murder. And I also think that's the reason why we'll probably be dealing with Orin as the last of the Chosen, potentially, in whichever chapter it ends up being. Because Baal is, in his own right, the scariest of them all. He is an extremely brutal entity. And the others are brutal in their own ways as well, but not in the way that Baal is. So I think what Larian is trying to do vis-a-vis the Dark Urge is connect the old games, that is, the Baalspawn saga, to the new one, but also remind you that Baal is not to be trifled with. And being burdened by some kind of Baal influence is very unpleasant. So we don't know really any of the details, which is good. I want this to be a surprise, but clearly the Dark Urge is an association, a connection with the deity of Baal, and it's there, in my humble opinion, for two reasons. One, to connect to the old games, and two, because Baal is the scariest of them all. He does not negotiate, he does not compromise, he just kills you, and that's about it. And oftentimes in very painful ways, by the way. And at the moment, the internal debate going on in my mind right now for my first playthrough is, will I play a good-aligned Dark Urge or an evil-aligned Dark Urge? That is the question, and I still don't know. As always, thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate any comments you can leave, liking the video, subscribing, sharing the video if you like the content. Really helps out the growth of the channel, much appreciated. And do consider joining my Discord server. We talk about RPGs above all, a lot about Baldur's Gate 3. There's a nice group of people there who are very into the game, and if you're into the game, I'm sure you enjoy it there. Until the next time, take care.